thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to come out here this evening to the Senate District 51 Republican gathering. Tonight we're very special. We're very welcome to have State Senator Mark Koran to give a few words about things that he feels is important.
Awesome, thanks, Jim. Thank you, everybody. I am, of course, State Senator Mark Koran, represent Senate District 28, which is Chisago and Isanti counties, almost all of both of those counties. I was first elected in 2016, so hard to believe it's 7 years. But I'm here. You know, everybody wonders why are we here. Most of us never planned to be in these roles, but I appreciate the support. I don't need more motivation. I got 7 grandchildren, and that's it. And so we're working to make sure that we provide the best opportunity in the future that the life we had. But what I thought I would do is cover, you know, you guys got the list of bills. What I thought I'd do is cover maybe 6 or 7 of them, of what we think are the most egregious rundown, and then do a Q&A, because you guys know what's important in your neighborhood. I don't want to assume that. I think there's a bunch of horrible ideas that were passed in this first legislative session with being in the minority. Don't like it. But I think the one thing I wanted to start out with was a couple people I talked to right when I got in there. And so we've lost the Senate and the House by less than 1,820 votes, less than 1,000 people. So it would seem that with this agenda, you see 75 bills. A couple of them are pretty benign. They're almost focused on funding government in its proper role. The rest are all pretty radical and pretty extreme. And so everybody says, oh, that one vote mattered in the Senate. And I would argue that one vote always matters. But the one thing that they did is to change the process of our governance. Our state constitution, U.S. Constitution, state constitution, and our rules. We use Mason's rules in the Senate. And then we have rules that we pass as a majority, or the majority gets to pass, whether we vote on it or not, about the floor, right? There's some things, you allow water on the floor, some things that aren't covered in there. But one of the things that is the most detrimental, and which allowed the pure extremist actions, was they changed the rules that you can allow remote voting as a senator to pass legislation in committees, in the Senate floor, and in every aspect of legislating. And that in itself is the most detrimental piece, because it's very hard to have 34 people at the Senate every day, because life happens, right? People are sick. Senator Carrie Dietzich, the majority leader, she had an illness, took her out for 3.5 months. That doesn't change the majority status, but our forefathers, I think, were brilliant enough that they didn't omit remote voting. I think it was a willful omission or accommodation, because it requires them to honor the minority voice. So when you have 34, right, that means your margin of victory is by 1 seat. If you have 8 seats, you get to do whatever you want, right? You're going to go, and that would be a mandate to have put forth your most radical agenda you would ever dream of. Because you could afford to have 3 or 4 people, 7 people be gone, because life happens. When we were in the majority, I had the blessing the first 6 years, in the majority, we had 2 of our senators have major heart attacks in session. What that causes you to do, and our forefathers were brilliant enough, what that requires you to do is talk to the minority party, because you may need that one vote just to open up the day's session, or the political agenda on any bill during that time to fund government. What it does is it requires the majority party to work with the minority party, and that automatically draws you back more toward the center and moderates all ideas and gets back to the core function of government. That is the single most detrimental thing that they've done, and it will forever destroy this state and politics in this state if they don't take action to change that come next year. Because there's no way we're ever going to go back to that when we take the power back in 2026 in the Senate. Why would we handicap ourselves? But we're rule followers, right? We believe, and I think the Constitution is worthy to live up to, attempt to live up to, as well as the rules in the Senate. They're designed to emote specific behaviors. It's architected discourse and well thought out. And so we have to get back to that. But the Democrats are going to be required to make a vote this February that will forever change the state. And so we got to let them know that this is going to be an issue. and do it real early in the session, so hopefully the media might cover something. But that really is detrimental because it doesn't honor the institution that we have, and it doesn't honor the minority voice, which is your voice represented by us. So with that, I'll cover a couple things. You guys first, you saw they ran out of the gates, right? You saw they hit the ground running. They don't know what their bills are. They didn't care. Most of the agenda was kind of templated. You can find these ideas all over the world. They're templated and handed down to their members at almost every aspect. So the first one was, they call it the PRO Act, right? Some call it the abortion bill. It was their top priority, as you know. And they sold it to the citizens, the public, about we need to preserve the right after the Dobbs decision, which moved that issue back to the states, where it's a states' right. Minnesota was one of the few states where it had already been adjudicated. Our Supreme Court guaranteed that right, up, I think, much further than it should be, up to the second trimester, and then after the second trimester with the exception, rape, incest, and the health and life of the mother. But they didn't tell anybody that. So they told everybody that it was just to preserve abortion in Minnesota. And what it did is it had very little to do with abortion when you look at the totality of the bill. You look at the battle in the House, they did a pretty good battle. If you guys followed what we did, we had 62 amendments to really show how radical this idea is. And to me, it's well beyond what 80% of Republicans and Democrats believed that they would do. So what it did is it changed it from the PRO Act. It wasn't really about abortion in its entirety, but it added about reproductive rights, guaranteeing reproductive rights. And that means sterilization, abortion, and gender affirmation. I'd call it non-affirmation, non-confirming, because what it will do is it'll allow somebody to go in and be chemically or physically castrated and harmed for life. If you're an adult, great, you should do whatever you want to do. If you can make that decision on your dime, do all those things. But the most egregious piece of it, when you look across the board with this, the reproductive rights, is it's for children with no age limit. If you looked and watched some of our debate or the amendments, we tried to show how radical and how extreme it was, and many times say, well, that wouldn't happen. Well, good, then it should be really easy to make sure that we codify that it never happens, whatever the scenario would be. My two amendments on it, we had 62 amendments, we probably had about 120 in the queue, but 62 amendments which really showed how radical their ideas and concepts are, well beyond the average person. My two were about children. Any adolescent, anybody that's not an adult, we need protection. So my two were, how about requiring parental consent? They voted that down. 34, no way. How about parental notification? No way. So that means somebody could take your child in to have for these services, any of those services, without your consent or knowledge as a parent. That's disgusting. The government does not own our children. Not at all. And so even within there, we highlighted one just again to show how radical it is, and which some of our citizens are having a tough time even understanding when we talk about it, how radical it is. They just think it's hyperbolic political rhetoric. It's really not. So one, we said the abortion bans, now mobile abortions are allowed, and we said, how about can we just not allow abortion bans in high school parking lots? Nope, voted that down. How about middle school parking lot? Let's at least make sure middle school children are protected from these medical services being performed on them. Nope, voted it down. How about at least elementary school? Voted them all down. And it's hard for the average person to consider that they would do that. All of the other amendments were just as horrible, and that they voted down to just show how radical it is. If you look at some of the other key bills, one of the early ones was House File 7. The blackout bill is what we call it. It's their carbon neutral or carbon-free bill by 2040. We won't be carbon-free for decades and decades and decades, unless you want to cease to exist in the form that you want to get rid of air conditioning and every luxury you have in every job, which requires clean, reliable, and affordable power. But what it does is it really puts a heavy emphasis on wind and solar, and wind and solar are supposedly really good for us. The problem is it's such a small mix of power, and without the reliability, we're going to have real challenges. Storage will likely happen, right? I think battery storage will be, in the coming decades, we'll probably see quantum leaps in technology. We're decades away. We're also decades away from the infrastructure to deliver the power, right? Power lines, those take decades and hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't have that. At the same time, they're telling us that we need to electrify everything in our life, right? Your gas stoves are no good, electrified. Your car, electrified. Commercial transportation, electrified. Exponentially increasing the demand on power. At the same time, they're going to dismantle reliable, their term is dispatchable, reliable sources of power, meaning coal. They've pushed Xcel into, they're getting rid of their coal generated in Minnesota by 2030. So in 7 years, that's going to be, and they are attempting to ban the coal-powered power plants as well that come from North Dakota up in the lignite mine or the fields. And so they've already started, they're going to be, Minnesota's going to be sued, going to consume probably millions of dollars defending that. And those energy producers will likely win. I believe they provide over 1.5 million homes with power today. Up there, just the coal plants up in North Dakota. So without a real plan, and nuclear is not allowed, no hydro is allowed over 100 megawatts, and so it really is heavily dependent, as it's stated, on wind and solar. Well, that's not possible, because you need dispatchable power. So they know they will have to continue to use natural gas. They claim they don't want it, right? They don't make real great accommodations. And we will have to have more peaker plants. Even to get wind and solar, if it were to work decades down, you need good dispatchable power. Natural gas is one of the best. They also make no accommodation for nuclear energy, exploration or expansion of it. All of it is still just to replace the generation we have today and not allow the dramatic expansion which would cover for the electrification of all of our transportation and everything. And if you look at, it's a hot day out there today. I haven't looked at the map today to see what the energy is, but if you guys aren't following the energy production in real time, there's a cool mobile app that you can do that. So when you hear the rhetoric out there about how quickly we're going to move, find out on a day like today, maybe 3%, 4% of our power will be generated by wind and solar. 3%. That means brownouts and blackouts, and cold days as well. Wind and solar don't work great in the winter, on really cold days and really hot days. So we have to have good, reliable, dispatchable power. So they're not really serious about getting rid of carbon in energy production, because their plan doesn't include nuclear. Let's see. State forecast, you saw those things. They built in a whole bunch of, just the trend is built-in automatic, autopilot, baked in inflators, increasing spending across the board. I think one of the bills, they passed an open appropriation if the legislature doesn't come to an agreement and pass a budget. It almost sounds like Congress. It's not a continuing resolution, but it would keep them functional and without the legislature actually funding them. We now have felon voting. So they passed felon voting, so that means anybody that their voting rights would be restored upon release of prison. Our Constitution requires, in order to achieve and obtain your voting rights back, or all your civil rights back, you have to meet all of the conditions of that sentence, which is paying the fees, fines, restitution, serving your incarcerated portion of your sentence, and also serving the probationary portion. Minnesota is second to the bottom in incarceration. So we typically already had, prior to this legislative session, shorter prison sentences and longer probationary periods. Well, they shortened up the prison sentences for anything future if they happen to charge them, and they passed also one of the bills that 5 years was the maximum probationary period that can be applied. So those are in a couple different bills, but they're all tied together. Driver's licenses for illegals. So they decided, now I would have, if we had a border, if we were in control, I would have put forth a bill for a driver's license for driving privileges only. So people don't realize that anybody that here's here illegally, they can buy a car, they're driving today. They can buy a car, you can finance a car through any financial institution in this country. They can buy a house and finance a house and get a mortgage today. So I would have done it, but it would have been very restrictive, driving privileges only. We used to have that up until 2003. The reason it changed in 2003, you guys remember an event that was in 2001, some 911? They used those types of IDs for illegals to leapfrog into full official government IDs, which allowed those 19 terrorists access to flight training schools and all of the things that they wouldn't have had access to. And in 2003, through rule, they removed that option to get a driver's license, not for somebody who was here as a non-resident on a visa. And those driver's licenses are coded that they're not a U.S. citizen. This new driver's license grants them the privileges of our law-abiding legal Minnesota residents. It's the same Class D driver's license that everybody here likely holds, with no markings indicating that it's driving privileges only and or that they're not a resident of this country. It also goes even further. It grants privileges that you don't have. So the data collected, probably some 130 or 140 different types of source documents that any of these illegal aliens would present to the Department of Public Safety, which with almost hardly any of them they're going to be able to verify. But that data is deemed private. It's not even available to law enforcement. And I believe the period they focused on, once they issue the ID, I think that in 14 days, all of that data is to be deleted. You don't get that privilege as a U.S. resident in Minnesota. And so we have real concerns with that. And then if you look at that bill and say, all right, you get to drive. Yeah, and there should be no opposition to having it identified as its driving privileges only. Now, we also have an election bill that guarantees automatic voter registration from anybody who interacts with the Department of Public Safety and or the Department of Human Services. Didn't I just say they're going to issue driver's licenses? We're supposed to trust the Department of Public Safety and trust the Secretary of State that none of those people, illegal aliens, are obtaining driver's licenses, and we're supposed to guarantee that that won't get into the statewide voter registration system, and they won't give us access to that system to be able to make sure. So some real key issues. Boy, you guys probably are in Bloomington. You guys have any catalytic converters being stolen? Don't worry, they wrote a useless bill to not prosecute catalytic converters. They put a whole bunch of burdens on legal businesses that are now going to have to provide proof of where that catalytic converter came from. They'll have nowhere to take them because the scrap dealers will likely not manage those burdens of the new regulations. So the black market will grow bigger than it ever has. Nobody's taking them to legal scrap dealers. The illegally obtained are not going to legal scrap dealers, but car dealers and auto repair shops, they deal with hundreds of them on a monthly basis, legitimately. So now they have to etch the VIN number in, and they have to show proof that they had title of the car, which car it came off of, and a whole host of penalties for all the law-abiding citizens. And likely not any of them for those that will continue to break the law. Just zipping through here to get to some of these other ones. Yeah, they made some big changes, or some changes on, under the public health emergency. We had a bunch of people that they just added to Medicaid, and they never took them off, even if they no longer qualified, because they just want to be nice. They've expanded medical assistance for a variety of other people on a permanent basis, so they don't have to go through and reapply or look at their qualifying status if they obtained or earned more income. It's House File 146, Transgender Sanctuary Bill. What that one does is, that way I called it Transgender Friday. So there was 3 horrible bills that they passed. And one of them provided, under Transgender Sanctuary, the ability for somebody to take their child. Let's say a Wisconsin resident. You were married, you got divorced. Your divorce decree has a parenting plan and a custodial agreement. This law allows either one of those parents, the non-custodial or the custodial, where it's shared custodial, to come into Minnesota for those reproductive rights services: sterilization, abortion, gender affirmation, or non-affirmation. Again, without that person's, the other parent's consent, or somebody that's not even related to the child can come over. And under this case, this scenario, our Attorney General will help facilitate, and the state will take custody of that child and provide that gender-affirming care. Horrible. On that day, they also then changed, under the transgender moniker, it's now a qualifying reason for Child Protective Services to take your children if you do not provide the gender non-affirming care to your child that chooses to identify as something other than they are, a minor child. So now, what we've seen pressure in schools, we see doctors today. I was at my county fair. 3 parents came up that said their doctor, in the routine physical for young children, 8, 9-year-olds, said, "Are you a boy, or do you feel like a boy or a girl today?" And so these people are sick. They are trying to lead the children down this path and confuse them to something that would otherwise just naturally occur, their ascension through life. So it provides the county services as a reason. If you as a parent don't provide that, that's cause for removal of your children, and the state will provide that care, that medical care. That could be, everybody talks about, puberty pausing services or medications. It's technically chemical castration. You're not going to be able to pause anything. That doesn't exclude surgical procedures if they so choose to provide that. That's horrible. That will cause a rational parent to do very irrational things. Then the last part of that is, so the states that have really taken action and have banned mutilation or chemical castration of minor children, they've made those illegal in the states. Minnesota said, well, if you're a pharmacist, a nurse, or a doctor who is charged in one of those states as a felon, and your license was removed, Minnesota will grant you a license to perform those services in Minnesota. It's literally hard to believe that there's so few people that have gender dysphoria that most people in the medical health field, in mental health medicine, would never see an adult or a child with gender dysphoria. A few years ago, there was only 2 gender dysphoria clinics in the country. Now there's hundreds of them. We got to take it into our hands, and we can be successful. And then when you look at kind of where else do we get the voters? There's like between 500,000 and 700,000 people in Minnesota that are over 18, not registered to vote, and have never registered to vote. And so when we look at the numbers, we're a majority center, right of center conservative state. We just gave them too much power by you greedy people going out starting businesses, raising your families, and working hard. They focused on, again, all those elected offices. So
like Dan said, it's so discouraging for everybody, and then we go out there and try to engage our people, and they're all, I'm gonna be moving in a year, right?
But yeah, I do. Yep, and I have great hope. I mean, we let them take it. That margin of victory, it looks horrible. All that stuff's reversible, right? I mean, that we have to, and we live in a great state. We still live in the greatest country in the world during the best economic times that have existed in mankind, and so we want to make sure we can take Minnesota back. So, quick, one last one.
Okay, I promise this will be
Yep.
quick. So I was a candidate in 2022.
Oh, thanks for stepping up.
I got shellacked. But one thing I had a bad premonition about 2022 back in the spring that year. I felt better about it throughout the summer. I was going into November feeling fairly well. obviously not. But what gave me that bad premonition was I talked to another candidate running who was fairly high up in the House.
Yep.
And I asked point blank, what is the Republican vision for Minnesota?
Yeah.
And to put it short, the answer he gave me did not seem substantial. So
Yep.
what is to keep people from moving out of the state, to keep people holding on, having hope,
Yep.
there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you just had to say, what's the Republican vision for Minnesota?
To how do we make sexy, right? The constitutional aspect of accountability and providing opportunity, right? That's where we have to, I agree with you, that, because, and not just for that future, to tie, what does that mean, right? What does that mean? And today, you look at it means parents get the choice to raise their families. Businesses are important, right? We've got to create them. That's less sexy. So you do have to sexy it up a little bit, but we really got to talk about the story about what does it mean to you? How is it touching you? Right today, you look at the target-rich environment, the difficulty is going to be finding those 2 or 3 things that are rich from the perspective of, if it's this transgenderism, the black population doesn't agree with that, the Hispanic population, the Hmong, right? No family. It's like, you're not going to take away our rights. So talking about what is again, our people say less government would be better. No government would be good, but less government would be better. But really tying in all those aspects, our energy policy, right? We can have clean, affordable, and reliable, and we're moving in that path, but with an all of the above strategy. Those are I agree, that message. Plus, just like the 2022, we knew the Dobbs decision was leaked, right? And so there should have been a message for Minnesota about what that meant. It had already been adjudicated. It's a guaranteed right in Minnesota. And we're not going to change for decades, right? And so to be able to address that. But then also to address that political side of our gubernatorial candidate, right? To get an endorsement, he's got to walk a plank. You can be extraordinarily pro-life, and would you take, as 80%, it's a high 70s, said that 15 weeks is what the entire United States says. 15 weeks is what we think is kind of the limit for abortion, with exceptions after that, right? Those are the types of things that have to come to head, and we've got a whole host of pro-Second Amendment, pro-life, right? All those things. You have to collectively say, all right, how do we win in a tough political area? How do we win in a 50-50 district, right? I get people beating our candidates down. It's like, unless you're crazy, fire-breathing, blood red, that's great. You can win in my district. But how do we get the best person who shares our values, who is electable in those very difficult areas? And what it takes as a caucus, we manage that one caucus. I think our caucus operates like no other. Our leadership takes our direction. And that doesn't exist anywhere there. And so what that means then is you have to legislate intelligently. And then it's, it's just weak and it's compromise. You know how much compromise to get a bill out of your own caucus? Right? But what it takes to legislate intelligently, we're all environmentalists, right? I don't know anybody that lives on clean air, clean water. But somebody may want to take this vote on whatever it is. It means you have to craft the bills that he wins, you win, and it's good for the environment and those things. You can do that. And so we get beat up, and what you don't see is, as a new candidate, you don't know who friend or foe is. And most foes clear to share your beliefs. And so you'll find that. And there's so many people that are, I call them the election profiteers, right? Trying to convince you your vote doesn't matter. And they're the ones that claim to share your values. And so we got to get over that. And we got to get through those things and stop making people, good, high-quality candidates, walk a plank that makes you unelectable. So it's a complex process to be able to negotiate what's best for Minnesota. And that district also matters. So how do you craft those things and you govern intelligently without ever compromising your values? So that's what we work hard to do. So thank you, everybody.